Every requirement spec has gaps. Most engineers fill them without thinking twice. They look at the gap, apply what they know, and keep moving. That's not initiative. That's the most expensive assumption in the project. Not because filling gaps is always wrong, because you can't tell the difference between a gap you understand and a gap you only think you understand until it's already too late to fix it cheaply. It happens for understandable reasons. Asking takes time and slows things down, and it can feel like you are signaling that you don't know what you are doing. Some engineering cultures actively reward gap filling. Moving fast is valued. Blocking on a question is not. And there is a third reason, the most dangerous one. The gap doesn't announce itself as a gap. It announces itself as something familiar, something you have seen before, something you already know how to handle. And that's exactly where the analysis stops. There are two fundamentally different kinds of gaps in a requirement spec. The first kind you can see. A placeholder, a section marked to be defined. A requirement that's clearly incomplete. You know something is missing and you make a decision. Ask, fill it, or document your assumption and move on. Either way, you are aware of the risk. The second kind you can see. Not because it's hidden, because it doesn't look like a gap at all. It's the edge case nobody thought to formulate. The requirement that logically belongs in the spec but was never written down. The dependency between two sections that nobody put in the same room. This gap doesn't get filled, it gets bypassed. Not because someone made a wrong decision. Nobody knew there was a decision to make. And it doesn't surface in the next review. It surfaces months later when the system is already built and someone finally notices what was never there. The invisible gap has a reliable trigger. We've done something like this before. That phrase is useful in many contexts. In requirements analysis, it's the most dangerous thing an engineer can think. It lulls you into a false sense of security. Because the moment you recognize similarity, the analysis slows down. You stop asking, what's different? You start filling from experience. And the difference is exactly where the problem lives. Novelty forces careful reading. Similarity creates the illusion of understanding. A completely new system gets scrutinized. A system that looks like the last one gets assumed. The gap in a familiar-looking spec is harder to find than the gap in a spec for something you have never done, because you are not looking for it. I saw this directly in automotive lighting development. A supplier, us, received a specification with placeholders. Not unusual, specs at early project stages always have areas still to be defined. We filled the gaps based on what we knew and on similar systems we had built before. The customer confirmed the direction. At a surface level, the confirmations were real. The communication was regular. What neither side knew at this point was that the customer had other requirements in a different part of the spec that hadn't been fully defined yet either. When those requirements were finally specified, they contradicted the assumptions we had made in the placeholder sections. Not because we had filled the gaps badly, because both sides were working with incomplete pictures, and the overlap between those pictures had never been checked. The result was a significant redesign, costly, time-consuming, nobody's fault in the obvious sense. But in hindsight, the writing was on the wall. Here's what made it structurally difficult to manage. A change request works when a requirement is added or explicitly modified. Then there is a formal trigger, a process, a cost conversation. But a placeholder that gets specified for the first time, that contradicts an assumption both sides had implicitly accepted, that's not a change in the formal sense. It's a clarification that pulls the rug out from under weeks of work. No clean CR trigger, no formal escalation. The cost lands anyway. Now, specs will always be incomplete. Projects can't wait for perfected specification. That's not the point. The point is that the two kinds of gaps need two different responses. For the visible gap, the placeholder, the open section, speak it. Don't fill it silently. We assumed X. Please confirm. Takes one sentence. One sentence sent early costs almost nothing. A redesign sent late costs everything. For the invisible gap, you can't ask about something you don't know is missing. What you can do is create the conditions where invisible gaps become visible. What helps is a thorough system analysis upfront with everyone in the room. Customer and development team. And questions that seem almost too obvious to ask. What did you have in mind here? What happens if this edge cases occurs? What should the system do when X and Y conflict? Those questions feel unnecessary. They are not. They're exactly what turns an invisible gap into a visible one before the system is built. The gap you can see is always cheaper than the one you never knew was there. When did you last fill a gap yourself, and how sure are you that was actually the right call?